Julian's mother sent my mother a handwritten card that spring, the first one she'd ever sent her in 8 years of family gatherings, thanking her for her patience and, in careful, deliberate language, apologizing for not seeing sooner what had been happening in her own dining room. My mother kept that card in the same drawer as her chipped blue teacup's felted pouch. She never mentioned it again, but she never threw it away either. Julian and I talked, eventually, about his silence at Thanksgiving. He told me he'd frozen, that he hadn't known how to stand between his sister and his wife, and that watching me handle it with paper instead of anger had taught him more about backbone than any argument could have. I believed him, mostly, because his mother told me privately, a few weeks later, that she'd misjudged how long she should have let it go on before saying something herself, and that she wouldn't make that mistake again. My mother still comes to every holiday now. She still brings the chipped blue teacup in its felted pouch, and it still sits at her place before anyone else's, because some things, once you fix them permanently. She never asked for an apology. She never asked me to do any of this. She simply kept showing up with grace and let me be the one who finally said what should have been obvious from the start. That presentation means nothing if it isn't built on something true, and that a woman who raised me with $11 an hour and 22 years of Saturdays will always outrank anyone who ever needed a title report to know who she was talking to. That's the story. If you made it this far, thank you for sitting with it. This is Legacy Belle, and we tell the stories about the moments people finally get to be seen for exactly who they are. Subscribe, ring the bell, and tell me below, who's the person in your life who deserved to be seated at the head of the table a long time ago?
When my grandfather set up trusts for his 4 grandchildren the year before he died, he named Grant Trustee for all of them because Grant was good with money. And because, as my grandfather put it at the time, standing in his kitchen with his reading glasses pushed up on his head, somebody in this family ought to be. I was $26,000 poorer in professional respect than Grant that year, and I didn't argue with the decision. Why would I? Grant did this for a living. I coded insurance denials. The partner, as I'll call him here because that's the role he played before he was anything else, the partner my sister chose, the partner my grandfather trusted, had a way of turning every conversation about money into a conversation about comfort. Nothing to worry about. Totally standard. I've got you covered. He'd earned that tone honestly once, 2 years into the marriage when Elaine's car got totaled and the insurance payout was slow. Grant had fronted the replacement car himself, in cash, no fuss, and mentioned it exactly never again unless someone else brought it up first. And the year we booked the venue for my grandfather's 80th birthday, it was Grant who caught the caterer double billing the deposit line and got $400 back before anyone else had even opened the invoice. Sees things other people miss, my mother said about him that day, and everyone at the table nodded, including me. Those are true stories. They just weren't the only ones, and I didn't know that yet. The first time I heard him say a version of that comfortable, nothing to worry about tone about my trust, I was refilling my coffee on a Sunday dinner and only half listening. I moved some of the Callaway trusts into a more aggressive allocation, he said to my mother, cutting his chicken without looking up. Better growth profile. Nothing to sign, nothing for anyone to worry about. That's what having a trustee is for. My mother nodded like he'd said something about the weather. I nodded too. I had a denial letter due Monday about a colonoscopy billed as 2 separate procedures, and I was thinking about that instead. The next quarterly statement that came to my house had a fund name I didn't recognize, Meridian Bridge Capital, instead of the index fund language I was used to seeing. I noticed it the way you notice a typo in something you're not actually reading, filed it under Grant knows what he's doing, and put it in the drawer with the others. Small things, after that, the kind of thing you only add up later, in a column, the way I add up everything else for a living. In March, the annual accounting Grant was supposed to send each trust beneficiary, a 1-page summary, required by the trust document itself, not a favor, didn't come. When I texted him, he said the custodian was migrating platforms and it would be a few weeks late. Totally normal, he wrote back, 3 dots after it like he was still typing something friendlier. It was 6 weeks late. When it arrived, it was 2 pages instead of 1, chattier than any accounting I'd ever seen, heavy on phrases like strong quarter and positioned for growth, and light on the actual ending balance, which was there, technically, in 6-point font at the bottom of page 2, wedged between a footnote and the page number. In June, at a barbecue at his and Elaine's place, Grant put a single sheet of paper in front of me between the burgers and the corn, sunglasses pushed up into his hair, a spatula still in his other hand. "Trustee acknowledgement," he said, easy, already turning half back toward the grill. I skimmed it, a paragraph about consenting to updated reporting cadence, a signature line, and signed it standing up, paper plate balanced on my forearm, because Elaine was calling everyone over for a group photo, and I didn't want to be.
The one person still hunched over paperwork in it, holding up a picture that was supposed to be about her husband's birthday and not about me. I found out what that page actually said 4 months later, and by then it had already done its job. Do you know what you signed at the last family gathering you went to? I didn't either, and I'm the person in my family whose entire job is reading what other people don't. That same week, Grant posted an update in the family group chat, the one the 4 of us grandkids and our parents all sat in, muted for months at a time until somebody's kid had a dance recital, thanking everyone for their patience through the transition and promising individual meetings before year end. My cousin Nate replied with a thumbs up emoji. My mother replied, "That's why we trust you, Grant," with a little red heart after it. I didn't reply at all, and it would be months before I went back and reread that thread with actual attention and noticed that in 9 months of messages across 4 grandchildren's trusts, Grant had never once used the word statement. The dinner was for the 1-year anniversary of my grandfather's death, which Elaine had turned, with real effort and real love, into something closer to a celebration than a wake. His good dishes out, his favorite record on, a toast planned after dessert. I asked at the toast whether the beneficiary accountings for the year were finally going to go out, since 3 of the 4 grandkids still hadn't gotten one. I asked it quietly, holding my water glass in the gap between courses. I did not ask it to embarrass anyone. I have gone back over that sentence in my head more times than I can count, and I still don't think there was a version of it that would have landed softer, because the problem was never how I asked. Grant didn't even put his fork down. "You audit hospital bills, Margot," he said, smiling at the table, not just at me. "I move actual money. Let me worry about the money." Somebody laughed. My mother said, "Margot, honestly," the way she says my full name when she's annoyed with me. My Uncle Phil raised his glass a half-inch like Grant had scored a point worth toasting. Elaine reached over and squeezed my hand like I'd said something sad instead of something reasonable, and the record kept playing, and I sat there holding my water glass and thinking about 6-point font. I didn't say anything else that night. I went home and got the box of my grandfather's old paperwork out of my closet instead, the one I hadn't opened since the funeral, and I started reading by lamplight at my kitchen table with a legal pad next to me, the way I read everything that actually matters. 2 things happened before I found what I was looking for, and I didn't understand either one of them at the time. The first was small. Out on Elaine's back patio that same night, getting air, I heard Grant on his phone near the fence line, voice pitched low in a way his dinner table voice never was. I know. Just get me through Friday and then we're fine." A pause, then quieter. "No, don't call the office line, use my cell." I filed it under marriage stress or client drama or nothing and went back inside for cake. 2 weeks after that, at my Aunt Ruth's house for a smaller Sunday gathering, Ruth mentioned, between complaining about her knee and asking why I still didn't have a boyfriend, that her neighbor's husband had pulled his retirement account out of that Wexler Fellows little fund after hearing it had a rough stretch back in the spring. I said something non-committal and changed the subject, because at the time it felt like neighborhood gossip and not information, and it would be another 6 weeks before I understood it was both. The second thing was that Denise, Grant's office manager, the woman with the peppermint bowl, texted my personal number a week later asking if I had a minute to talk off the clock. I didn't recognize the number and almost didn't answer. 6 months before any of this, I'd caught a surgical center billing 41 patients for a device that had been recalled and quietly swapped out for a cheaper one, because the replacement invoices used a part number 1 digit off from the original, a typo nobody was supposed to notice, in a stack of paperwork nobody was supposed to read twice. That's the whole trick of the job. Fraud rarely announces itself. It just gets tired eventually and reuses a template it shouldn't have. The box from my grandfather's closet had an original custodian statement in it from the year the trusts were funded, the actual account number, the actual custodian, before any of Grant's migrations. I set them side by side on my kitchen table with the most recent statement Grant had mailed me, the way I lay 2 versions of a claim next to each other at work when something doesn't reconcile, and I looked at them the way I look at everything, not for what they said, but for what they were made of. The logo was wrong. Small thing, a font weight, a slightly different shade of navy, but the custodian had rebranded twice since the account was opened, and the statement in my hand was using artwork from before the first rebrand, which meant somebody had generated it from an old template instead of pulling it live from an actual account. I've caught exactly this kind of thing at work, a facility resubmitting an old rate sheet because updating it would have shown the real numbers. It is never, in my experience, an accident. I called the custodian directly the next morning, not through Grant's office, using the account number from the original statement, and asked to verify a beneficiary account. The representative, her name was Carol, and she was patient with me in a way I will always be grateful for, put me on hold for 4 minutes and came back with a voice that had gone carefully neutral, the way people's voices go when they're about to tell you something they know is going to be bad. The account had been fully liquidated 11 months earlier. The proceeds had been wired out to a business account under the name Meridian Bridge Capital LLC. Not reallocated, not migrated to a new platform, liquidated. Gone. I sat at my kitchen table holding the phone after Carol hung up and did the thing I do at work when a number won't reconcile. I went back to the beginning and checked every line again, like the mistake might be mine. It wasn't. $500,040, funded the year my grandfather died, gone 11 months ago into an account with my brother-in-law's business name attached to it, and every statement I'd been handed since then had come from a printer, not a custodian, on paper that used a logo the actual custodian had stopped using 2 rebrandings ago. I'd been an auditor for 9 years. I had been looking at forged documents in my own kitchen for months and hadn't once thought to doubt the man who kept telling me not to worry. Have you ever caught yourself thinking the small, ugly thought before you could stop it, the one you're not proud of? Mine was, I have spent 9 years being right about numbers for a living, and it took me 11 months to check my own family's paperwork, because I liked being told I didn't have to. I told Elaine before I told anyone else because some part of me still believed she'd want to know before it became a family event. She listened for exactly as long as it took me to say the word liquidated, standing at her own kitchen island with a dish towel still in her hand, and then she set the towel down very deliberately and said, "You've never liked him. This is not new." I said this wasn't about liking him.
"He has handled Grandpa's money for 4 years and nobody else has a problem," she said. "You skip one dinner where he's short with you and suddenly he's a criminal?" My mother, when I called her that same night, asked me if I was sure I wasn't just still upset about the toast. My Aunt Ruth, when it came up at her house 2 weeks later, because of course it came up, because nothing in my family stays contained, said maybe I should focus less on Grant's trust duties and more on finding a husband of my own, since I clearly had a lot of extra time to worry about other people's marriages. I sat in my car in her driveway afterward and let myself have exactly one bad, small, petty thought, which was, I have spent 9 years being right about numbers for a living, and none of these people have ever once called me smart the way they call him smart. Then I drove home and read my grandfather's inscription one more time under the kitchen light and made myself a list instead, because a list was the only thing that had ever actually helped me. I asked my questions in the family group chat once, carefully one Sunday night, laying out the liquidation date and the LLC name in plain sentences with no adjectives in them at all. My mother replied that this wasn't the place. Nate didn't reply. Elaine left the thread entirely for 6 days and came back only to post a photo of her and Grant at a lake house, no caption, which I understood well enough without one. The list led me to a trust litigation attorney named Priya Nataraj, whose office had a waiting room with actual matching chairs, which felt at the time like a good omen and turned out to be irrelevant. "You have a right to a full accounting," she told me, sliding the trust document back across her desk, glasses down on her nose. She'd already read the acknowledgement form I'd signed at the barbecue, the one I'd brought in a manila envelope along with everything else. "This form waives interim notice between annual accountings. That part's legal if it's disclosed properly at signing. It wasn't. You were told it was a custodial formality. That's the part that matters." That single page, I understood then, was the reason nobody at the custodian's end had flagged a beneficiary about a liquidation for 11 straight months. You also, based on what you're describing, may have a trustee who's committed a serious breach of fiduciary duty, but I want you to understand the shape of this before you decide anything. This is slow. It is not one letter and a check. It's a formal demand, then likely a petition, then discovery, and depending on how he responds, it could go to a hearing. Retainers $4,000 to start, and there will be more after that if this goes to litigation, which it probably will, because men who forge letterhead rarely settle on the first ask. I asked her what happened if I couldn't prove the wire transfer without his cooperation, since he controlled the only office that had ever handled the paperwork. "Then it gets a lot harder, a lot slower, and a lot more expensive," she said, not unkindly. "I won't pretend otherwise." I wrote the check anyway, out of the savings account I'd built driving my mother to 11 months of infusions and not once mentioning it at dinner, and I told my supervisor at the hospital I'd need 2 personal days on short notice at some point that fall, without saying why, and she said fine and didn't ask. I missed a coding error that October that I would never have missed in April, a facility billing for an overnight stay that was actually an outpatient procedure, caught 2 weeks late instead of same day, because I'd spent my lunch hour that day on the phone with Priya's paralegal instead of my usual second read-through. Nobody at the hospital ever knew why. I signed a formal demand for accounting that Priya's office sent to Grant's practice the following Tuesday. Grant's response came back through his own lawyer 9 days later, a 2-paragraph letter asserting that all trust actions had been within the trustee's reasonable discretion and that the beneficiary accountings were in process. No numbers, no account statements, just discretion, 4 times, like the word itself was collateral. I was still reading it a second time, sitting at my kitchen table with my grandfather's notebook next to my elbow, when Denise called. I hadn't called her back after the first text. I called her back now. "I've been asked to backdate 3 of his file memos," she said. No preamble, like she'd been holding the sentence in her mouth for a while and needed to get it out before she changed her mind. "About a rebalancing decision that supposedly happened in January. It didn't happen in January. I do his calendar. I know what happened in January, and it wasn't that." I asked her why she was telling me this and not, say, a regulator. "Because he hasn't paid me in 6 weeks," she said, flat, no drama in it at all. "And because I looked at the actual custodian file 2 months ago by accident, doing a mailing list, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it since. There's a wire from March, $500,000 and change out of a Callaway Trust account into Meridian Bridge. I have the confirmation. I can send it to your attorney tonight if you tell me where." I gave her Priya's email address with my hand not quite steady, and 40 minutes later Priya texted me one line, "Got it. This changes things." And I sat at my table and looked at the notebook and thought, for the first time in 4 months, that I might actually win this. I didn't know yet what winning was going to cost the rest of us. Priya's petition to remove Grant as trustee went in 11 days later, with Denise's wire confirmation attached as an exhibit, and the trust document itself required personal service on the trustee, which is a formal way of saying somebody has to hand it to him. I asked to be the one who did it. Priya looked at me for a second longer than the request probably warranted, and then said, "Your call. I'll have the server meet you there as backup in case he won't take it from you." I told her I didn't need backup. I needed exactly one thing, and it fit inside a folder. That's the lobby I was standing in, peppermints and gold nameplate, when this story started. That's the door that opened. Grant looked the way he always looks, pressed shirt, easy shoulders, a smile already halfway assembled before he even saw who it was for. "Margot, hey, I've got about 10 minutes before my next..." I set the folder on Denise's desk instead of his, because it felt important, suddenly, that she be the one holding it when it changed hands. She looked at it, then at him, then back at me, and didn't move to give it back. "Grandpa used to say something," I told Grant, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to, back when he was teaching me to do his checkbook, before either of us knew what any of this would turn into. Trust the columns, not the smiles. I didn't understand it when I was 9. I understand it now. I opened the notebook to the inside cover and set it flat on the desk, facing him, next to the folder. I didn't hand him anything else. I didn't wait for him to say something back. I turned around and walked out past the peppermint bowl, and I let the door close behind me on its own, and that was the whole confrontation. No raised voices, no scene, just paper on a desk and a sentence he could take or leave. He took it badly, according to Denise, who texted me twice that afternoon against every instinct of professional caution she had left. He canceled his 3 o'clock, he stood in his office with the door shut for 11 minutes on the phone, and then 10 minutes later countermanded himself and told her to get his lawyer on the line instead, twice in 2 different tones. She said it was the first time in 4 years she'd seen him fumble the login to his own scheduling software, typing his own password wrong twice in a row. Elaine told me that night, and it did not go well. She said I'd humiliated him in front of his own employee, that I clearly wanted this to be as public and as ugly as possible. I told her I'd delivered it to an office with 1 receptionist in it, quietly, on a Tuesday, and asked her what a private version of it would have looked like that she'd have actually believed. She didn't have an answer for that. Neither, really, did I have an answer for what came next, which was that we didn't speak again for 5 weeks. The mediation happened in a conference room at Priya's building 3 weeks later. His lawyer, my lawyer, him, me, a folding table, a pitcher of water nobody touched until the very end, a ceiling vent somewhere behind me pushing out air that was slightly too cold for the sweater I'd worn. His lawyer asked for a 5-minute recess 20 minutes in after Priya read the wire confirmation into the record for the second time. Grant came back from it with his tie a little loosened at the collar, which I had never once seen him do at any family dinner in 9 years, and he didn't reach for the water pitcher the easy, automatic way he used to reach for a dinner check. He looked at it first, like he wasn't sure it was safe to want something in that room. Priya laid out the real custodian statements next to the ones he'd printed for the family, side by side, month by month, and there is a specific kind of silence that happens when 2 documents that are supposed to say the same thing don't, and everyone in the room sits in it together, whether they want to or not. His lawyer tried discretion again, once, out loud, and Priya asked him to point to the discretion clause that authorized moving beneficiary funds into an LLC the trustee personally controlled. Nobody answered that. Grant reached for the water pitcher then, filled his glass, didn't drink from it. He checked his phone once, face down fast again, like he'd been hoping for a message that wasn't there. "I can explain the March entry," he said, and then didn't for a long moment, just looked at the 2 statements like they might rearrange themselves if he stared long enough. "Please do," Priya said. "The fund was down 11% in the spring," he said, finally, to the table, not to me. I needed a bridge. I was going to put it back before the next accounting. That's what a bridge loan is. I've done this before, smaller, and it's always worked out. I wasn't going to let anyone lose anything. I was protecting the family's money the way I've always protected it. It was the most honest sentence he'd said to me in a year, and it was also, I understood watching his face while he said it, exactly what he believed. Not a lie he was telling us in that room, a story he'd been telling himself since March, and it had held up right up until 2 custodian statements sat next to each other on a folding table and stopped agreeing with him. His lawyer tried once more, quieter this time, about keeping this contained, about what a public referral would do to his practice, his other clients, his marriage. Grant didn't back him up on it. He just sat there, turning the water glass a quarter turn at a time, and I understood that the controlled version of him I'd watched my whole adult life had used up whatever it ran on, somewhere between the printer logo and the wire confirmation, and there wasn't going to be a version of this meeting where he got it back. He asked to speak to me alone for a minute, after, out in the hallway by the elevator, his lawyer visibly unhappy about it. I said fine. 5 minutes. Door open. "We can do this without the state board," he said, low, fast, the salesman cadence trying to find its footing again and not quite landing. "Full repayment today, on paper, and this stays a family matter. Elaine doesn't need the rest of this on top of everything else. Neither do you, honestly." I told him the repayment was never in question, that it was owed regardless of what else happened. I told him the referral wasn't a punishment I was choosing to hand him. It was the plain fact that other people's retirement accounts were sitting in the same fund mine had been, and none of them had a sister with an auditor's eye for a rebranded logo. "That's not fair," he said. "No," I said, "it isn't. Neither was 6-point font." He didn't have anything to say back to that. He straightened his tie, the one he'd loosened in the recess, and went back into the conference room ahead of me, and I stood by the elevator for a second longer than I needed to, because some part of this was still, even then, hard to feel good about. We didn't take the deal his lawyer floated formally, either, the one where Grant would repay the full principal quietly, no referral to the State Investment Advisor Board, framed on paper as keeping this in the family. Priya asked me what I wanted, and I told her. Full repayment plus statutory interest, immediate removal as trustee for all 4 grandchildren's trusts, and replacement with the corporate co-trustee my grandfather had originally named as backup, and Grant had quietly let lapse off the paperwork 2 years in. And the referral stays. His lawyer didn't love it. Grant didn't say anything at all, just signed where Priya's finger landed, 3 times, and didn't look up once while he did it. The trust got made whole, $518,000 and change, principal and interest, wired back inside 60 days once the corporate trustee took over administration, clean statements every quarter since, real logo, real font. Getting there took its own slow paperwork, too. Assigned consent from all 4 grandchildren, a new account opened under the bank's trust division, 6 weeks of the corporate trustee's own compliance department verifying every dollar before they'd agree to take the account on at all. Nobody wants a fraud-adjacent account on their books without checking it twice, it turns out, no matter which side of the fraud you're standing on. That part of the story has a tidy ending, and I want to be honest that it's the only part that does. Elaine filed for divorce 4 months later, for reasons that were hers to have and hers to talk about, not mine, though I don't think it takes an auditor to see the line between the two. She and I speak now, carefully, mostly about our mother, mostly by text. We have not had a full holiday together since, and this past Thanksgiving was the first one either of us has spent somewhere else entirely. My mother still some days thinks I could have handled the whole thing more quietly, and some days doesn't, and I've stopped expecting her to land on one answer for good.
Denise found a new job at an actual bank within 2 months and still texts me the occasional good morning, which I did not expect and which I am honestly glad to have. Grant's practice lost 11 clients in the first month after the state board opened its inquiry. I don't know what happened to the 12th. Nate never did reply, not once, not even after the corporate trustee sent him his own restored balance with a formal letter attached. Aunt Ruth, for her part, brings up the rough stretch at Meridian Bridge to anyone who'll listen now, as though she'd said so all along, which, in fairness to her, she sort of had. Here's the thing 9 years of reading other people's paperwork taught me, long before any of this happened to my own family. Trust isn't a feeling, it's a set of numbers somebody has to be willing to check, on a schedule, whether or not the person who gave them to you is smiling when he hands them over. I still have the notebook. I keep it in the drawer with my own statements now, where I look at it more than I probably need to. Some nights I think about all those quarters I filed away without opening, and I ask myself the same question I'd ask anyone else sitting where I used to sit. What's currently in your own drawer unopened, because the person who handed it to you is family and you didn't want to be the one who checked? I used to listen to stories like this one, the ones about terrible in-laws and missing money and family dinners gone wrong, and assume they were exaggerated for effect, the kind of thing that plays better as a story than it ever would in real life. I don't assume that anymore. I think most of them are just somebody's actual quarterly statement read out loud once somebody finally opened the drawer. I still audit claims for a living. I still find the $6 nobody thought anyone would go looking for. I don't think that job ever made me suspicious of my own family. I think it just eventually taught me what to do with the suspicion once it showed up on its own.